That makes it really easy for me to be able to ad-lib, to share a little bit of my story, to give some personality to the podcast without feeling like I'm over scripting it or I have no idea what I'm talking about. Podcast length should be as long as it takes you to get your point across of what you're trying to express to your audience without having to go any further than that. Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead-generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today, we are going to talk about how to choose a podcast format for your show, but I want to talk about which one is going to make the most sense for you. So a lot of this is going to be, it depends, but I get this question a lot when I am talking to potential clients or talking to people who are considering launching a podcast. They're not really sure what format they need to have, how often, how long do the episodes need to be. There's a lot of questions around that. So I'm going to give you guys some broad ideas, some preferences that I like to see, maybe some things that I'm seeing with my clients, and then allowing you to decide what you want to do with your show and how you would like to format your podcast. During this episode, we are going to be talking about 4 different things in particular when it comes to formatting your show. First one is actual format, so host, solo, scripted, non-scripted, etc. Length, consistency, and seasons. So those are the 4 things that we're going to be talking about today. So first is the format. This is really important to understand and figure out right away. You need to decide if you are going to have a solo show or if you're going to have a host or a co-host or multiple hosts for your podcast. It really depends on the type of show that you're producing. For most of you, it's going to be solo shows because your podcast is for your business and your goal is to generate leads for your business. So unless you have a co-founder or maybe team members that you want to have on, you're more likely to just have a solo show. Now, this really isn't getting into whether you have interviews or not. We're talking specifically who is the main point of contact for your show, who is going to be hosting it. The next part of your format that you need to decide on is going to be if you're going to do interviews or solos or a hybrid. So do you plan on having exclusively just an interview style podcast? If you listen to the last solo episode I did where I'm talking about how to generate leads with your podcast, then you'll know that I don't believe that you should just be doing interviews if your goal is to generate leads. Now, if you are specifically using your podcast to interview potential clients, that's going to be a little different. You're still going to want to show up in a very authoritative type of way. And so it'd be important to make sure that you do have some type of solo episodes, hot takes. Maybe you are piecing parts of your own encouragement, whatever else that you're trying to get your point across in a solo way. You want to be able to integrate that into your show. So if you end up only doing interviews, then maybe in between thoughts or in between questions that your guests have, if you are interviewing only potential clients or current clients, then that's something that you can do. But I always recommend that you have some type of solo content because you need to be able to show up as the expert and answer the questions that your clients and your potential clients have when they listen to your show. We're also starting to see a trend. More and more people are stating, and this is just in the business podcast space, right? So I'm Haven't done any crazy studies on this. I don't have any like official statistics, but from what I'm seeing and the trends that I'm kind of seeing come out of the last 6 months is that people who listen to business podcasts or educational podcasts from business owners prefer to listen to solo episodes. When they see that there is a guest on, they're less likely to actually listen to those. Now, if your podcast is about sharing those stories and your audience likes to hear those stories, then keep doing that. Don't take this as like, Alicia said, I need to change this. Please don't. Like, if it's working for you, then keep doing it. What I'm saying is if you're starting off new and you are like, well, I only want to do interviews, please don't. We want your audience to be able to hear from you, to be able to hear exactly what it is that you're trying to express to them, and to be able to show up as like, hey, I know what I'm talking about. Here's how you pay me money. They get value. You get money. It's a transactional exchange of information and value, and that's what we want to see. Back in episode 21, I talked about how to organize and plan your podcast content. And during that episode, I also talked about during the plan section, whether you needed to have talking points or an outline or a full script. Now, this is really important when coming up with the format of your podcast as well. You need to decide if you want to have a scripted show, if you want to just freestyle it and just say, hey, look, this is me. This is how I'm showing up. I kind of have an idea what we're going to talk about, but we're going to let this conversation go. I think the important thing here is to know what works best for you and know how best you like to deliver information. For me personally, I like to have something of an outline, but it's not like I'm writing a full research paper and I have all of these talking points and all of this stuff. I literally just have, hey, don't forget to cover this, and this. That makes it really easy for me to be able to ad-lib, to share a little bit of my story, to give some personality to the podcast without feeling like I am over-scripting it or I have no idea what I'm talking about. You're going to have to decide which of these kind of formats works for you. So to recap on the format side, one or more hosts, interviews, solos, or hybrids, and then if you plan on having a scripted, outlined, or bullet pointed or freestyled show. Now let's talk about the length of your show. Podcast length should be as long as it takes you to get your point across of what you're trying to express to your audience without having to go any further than that. If you have a show where there's some banter back and forth, that adds to the personality of your show, and that is fine. But once you start adding in tangents or sidetracked discussions or things that aren't really relevant to the current topic and what you guys are trying to get across or what you as a host are trying to express, then that is where it's like, oh, I think I need to cut this out. I personally try to keep my episodes around 30 minutes or less because I know that my audience likes that. They want those bite-sized, quick, digestible, informational, okay, I can take action on this and listen to this episode and I'm good to go. I don't want to sit here and berate you for an hour. That is not my style. Also, once you have a podcast, especially from an educational standpoint and a business podcast standpoint, once you have a podcast that starts hitting that 1 hour mark, you're going to start to lose people. So I think it's really important to just know that what is the time frame that is actually going to work for me? And then what is the time frame that's going to work for my audience? And how can I mesh those two together? But if you're like, Alicia, just give me a number. Most podcasts are around the 30 to 45 minute range. That is statistically around where the average podcast lands. And so if you need a number, I would say stick with that. Don't go past 45 minutes. Try to keep it around 30 minutes if you can. But again, it really is about what is going to work best for you and where you feel most comfortable. There are also podcasts where the host is like, look, I just want quick, digestible 10, 15-minute conversations or 10, 15-minute solo episodes where I'm sharing my heart with my audience. They get it quick, fix of whatever it is that I'm saying. they're able to get that boost of energy and go about their day. That's important too, to know like what is it that is going to work for you, what is going to work for your audience, what is going to work for the type of content that you're actually producing. I have looked at quite a number of podcasts about podcasts. In doing that research and that market research and trying to see where I can differentiate my show, I found that a lot of podcasts about podcasting are less than 10 minutes. And that didn't feel right to me. Like that didn't feel like something I would be comfortable with. That didn't really feel like my style either, because I like to give examples. I like to, I guess, rant and rave about stuff and express like, I'm really passionate about this and here are some examples and this is what you need to do. So for me, 5-10 minutes does not make sense, like at all. And that's not going to work for me. So if I can keep my solos around 20 minutes and my guests around 30, then that feels really good. Now, I do have episodes where it's a solo episode. There's not a lot that I can say about the topic, but it's still important and I want to express it. And those actually end up being around 10 to 15 minutes, and that's okay. As long as I am able to get my point across and get the content into your ears and digested by you within a particular time frame that I'm typically working with. Okay, so let's talk release consistency. So how often should you release an episode? What day of the week should you release an episode? All right, so there are podcasts out there where they have daily releases. For a business podcast, I don't recommend doing that. That doesn't really make any sense, especially if you are creating valuable content that your audience can go back and binge whenever they want or when they first find you, whatever. Then you don't need to release every day. Most podcasts within the entrepreneurial and business space release their episodes either once a week or every other week. That is pretty common. There are some that release twice a week. Those are less common, but typically you're going to see either every other week or every week. When you're starting out, I recommend you really take a look at your schedule, take a look at your capacity, take a look at the information and the episodes that you have. So have you planned out those first 10 episodes? In episode 24, you can see how to plan out the first or next 10 episodes of your podcast. That is really great for kind of coming up with ideas, finding out what you want to talk about to your audience. And so I recommend you go back and listen to that episode. That'll really kind of guide you on what you need to do and where you need to start kind of taking that next step to creating that content. But if you have those 10 episodes planned out and you're like, all right, all I need to do is just batch record these, then you're not going to have trouble having a weekly show. Now, if you come up with those first 10 episodes and you're like, wow, that was really difficult and I don't know how much information I actually have, and I don't know if I have enough content to keep producing a podcast, then what I would actually recommend you do is do a series. If you feel like I can cover everything in about 10 episodes or I can cover everything in about 20 episodes, a limited series might make the most sense for you. So make sure you consider that as well. So in picking your consistency, I want you to remember to check your capacity, check what your schedule looks like, and if you have enough content that you'll be able to produce an ongoing show, and then decide from there how often you can contribute your time, your effort to actually showing up for your podcast and your audience and the content that you're producing, and like having time to market it and talk about it and share it without feeling like you're going on a hamster wheel and you're struggling to come out with anything, right? Like, I don't want you to feel like that. So really feel into what is going to work best for you. Before we go on to seasons, I want to talk about what day of the week to release your show. So the majority of podcasts actually release on Mondays or Wednesdays. So if you would like your episodes to go live on those days, then great. But I'd also like to challenge you to do something a little different. And I actually had a client change the day of the week that her podcast was going live because of this exact thing. She found that a lot of the podcasts that she listened to and that her potential clients and potential listeners listen to were coming out on Tuesdays, and her show was coming out on Tuesdays. Now, on my side, and what I see for our clients, it actually is that Wednesdays and Mondays are more popular. But for her particular audience and the podcast that they're listening to, she was seeing Tuesdays. So she decided, and we chatted about this, to move her podcast day to Thursday. So that way, when her potential listeners and potential clients got notifications, they didn't get kind of shuffled in with the rest of the podcasts that are released on Tuesdays. So it's really about being strategic with what you want to do, or just pick a day. If you're trying to think through and you're like, well, Alicia, I don't know what day is going to work for me. There are way too many options, and just tell me to pick a day. Like, really, just pick a day. Pick a day that is going to work for you as well as for your audience, and is something that you can stay consistent with. If you know that a Monday show isn't going to work for you because you won't have time to promote it because maybe you take Mondays off, then don't do Mondays. Pick a day that is going to work best for you and your audience. Now let's talk about seasons. I have been getting so many questions about seasons lately. Should you do seasons? How long is a season? What makes a season? So many questions. Okay, so let's talk seasons, and then that'll be it for how to choose a podcast format that's going to work best for you and your audience. First and foremost, a podcast season is like a group of episodes where they are either one of two things: compiled based on a particular topic, or compiled based on a particular time frame. So let's talk seasons that are based on a topic first. You might say that you want to have only a particular type of person or expert or gender or whatever on your season 1. And then in the next season, you're going to have a different type of person, expert, someone a different gender, whatever. That's going to be more on like topic or categorized a little differently. So here's an example. I have a client where she is categorizing her podcast seasons based on a theme. What is the theme that she wants to kind of infuse in these initial 15 episodes? And then what is the theme that she wants to infuse into the next 15 episodes? And it kind of follows her signature program's format and the main topics that she's talking about in that. So that is creating that season there. Another example is there's a podcast, and I cannot for the life of me remember the name, but they talk about marriage, life, girlfriends, careers. Like, it's like more of a lifestyle podcast. And so this wouldn't be exactly an example that would work best for you guys, but it at least gives you an idea of what I'm trying to express with seasons based on topics. So they have seasons where they are talking specifically about relationships and marriage. So this season, this is what we're talking about. And they've formatted it so that it makes sense where someone wants to learn about relationships or learn about marriage or learn about whatever topic it is that season, then they can go to that season and pick what they want to listen to based off of the episodes that are available to them. I listened to a book podcast, and they do seasons based on the genre that they're discussing. So they'll do about 10 podcast episodes or 10 book reviews per season, and each season is based on a theme or a genre of books. The next type of way that you can kind of categorize your seasons is based on a time frame. So we have a client that they are going to be taking off the month of July and the month of December for their podcast. And so their seasons are batched in months. So they have season 1, which was August through November. Then they take that break in December. And then their next season is January to June, take that break in July. I have another client where it's an astrology podcast, and their seasons are astrological years. So the astrological new year is in Aries, and that is when their new season starts. So they're able to kind of format it with like this is what you're getting in last season, and that was for this astrological year, and then here's the new astrological year, and we're going to start a new season. So when it comes to how many episodes should actually be in the season, you get to decide whether it is by topic or by time frame or seasons of the year or timelines of the year. It's really up to you and what you want your podcast to be like. So that is how you get to decide and choose a podcast format that is going to work best for you. I want you to always, always, always consider reaching out to your audience and asking them what kind of podcasts they prefer to listen to. So this is something that I did for my hobby podcast, where I asked our audience, hey, do you listen to podcasts? If you do, how often do you listen? Things like that. Once you picked a podcast format that you're excited about and you are ready to launch your podcast, send me a DM, whether you're going to work with us or not. I absolutely love, love, love to cheer you on. So send me a message. Let's chat about your podcast and the format that you decided to go with. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.